And I present to you Mr. Luther C. Steward.
Conducted at Oklahoma A&M in that most important branch of agriculture, basketball. I have to make a sort of a compromise between my ancestors far back before they were chased out of Scotland and something my grandfather used to tell me as a small boy. Now, in the old days in Scotland, when a young man was being tested out as a minister to a new congregation, he'd preach a trial sermon. He'd put an hourglass on the pulpit. And if his sermon didn't last long enough for the hourglass to be turned 3 times, they'd nod their heads and said, he won't do, he doesn't have a call for the ministry. On the other hand, my grandfather used to tell me that he doubted if very many souls were saved after the first 20 minutes. So I'll have to compromise between those two extremes. I think I'm correct in calling myself a federal man. Since I entered the federal service in March 1896, I've had 2 employers, the government of the United States and the employees of the government of the United States. And therefore, as my life has been channeled along that specialized road, I have to guard myself because as I talk only on one subject, left to my own devices, I have no terminal facilities. Now, the origin of the National Federation of Federal Employees is easily described. With the gradual growth of government, which took on new impetus at the beginning of the present century, in demand for additional federal activity, Congress enacted various statutes establishing new departments and agencies, but without any system whatsoever. The expansion was in number and size, but very unsystematic. And the bigger it grew, the more baffling the problem appeared to be, with the result that there came a time when, with the beginning of World War I in Europe and the sudden continued rise in the cost of living in the United States, and the preoccupation not only of the Congress but the executive to a great many other matters, civilian federal employees found that they were indeed a forgotten group. And then a number of us belatedly awakened to the fact that if you really believe in something, why don't you do something about it? And so we began to gather together in groups, and finally in September 1917, representatives of about 45 local groups gathered in Washington, and we formed the National Federation of Federal Employees. And our birth date was September 24, 1917. We none of us had any experience in an organization of federal employees. We, all of us, had considerable experience as federal employees. We had no precedents to guide us in the formation or maintenance of such an organization. We started out to navigate an uncharted sea. But we drew on our collective experience as federal employees and went to work. We were very clear on some things. One was that federal employees were a select group, that they, as citizens of the United States, had certain duties and responsibilities, but having voluntarily determined to enter the employ of the federal government and therefore become employees of the people of the United States, they were charged with a double duty, a double responsibility. We decided that although there was so much needed to be done to improve the social and economic conditions of federal employees, that there was another objective that ran parallel, and that was to improve the operation of the government itself. A purpose not wholly altruistic, because our collective common sense told us that it would be much better for the employees themselves to be connected with an enterprise that was efficiently operated, and that the opportunities for securing recognition for satisfactory performance of duty would be much better in a business that was operated in accordance with some common sense system. We saw in the whole federal structure, our concept of the whole federal structure was that of a team, with every man and woman in it, military and civilian, a member of that team. And every action of any member of that team having either an effect of improving the teamwork or of dragging it down. We felt that if any progress was to be made in the operation of government, the viewpoint of employees could not be ignored. We had no desire, in fact it was foreign to our philosophy, to hold that employees should have the determination, the final decision. Those are functions of management. But we felt then, and have never in any way changed our opinions, and a good portion of the population is beginning to catch up with us, that no successful business, either public or private, can afford, prior to making important decisions, to fail to sound out and secure employee opinion and employee suggestion. Those who are closest to the work performed, those who have a tremendous fund of constructive ideas, a source that in so many instances is by no means fully tapped. Well, when we got started, we had a tremendous collection of things that hadn't been done, neglects, indifference, a complete obliviousness to the facts of life as they related to the men and women in the So we had to make a start somewhere. Launched out, among other things, as a legislative agent, as a negotiator, as a missionary. And for the first 2 or 3 years, my calls on officialdom, either in the legislative or the branch of our government, followed one pattern. Before I could state the object of my call, I would be subjected to a very detailed catechism. What was this organization? What right had we to exist? Didn't I know that appointed officials or elected officials were perfectly capable of running the government without any impudent suggestions from the employees? Why didn't I get back to work for which the government was paying me a salary and evidently from which job I was playing hooky? So I'd spend half or 3/4 of an hour citing our excuse for existence and then get around to the subject of my visit. That day has long passed. There's a considerable change in climate. No longer is the organization or me as an individual a subject of congressional debate as to why we should be permitted to do what we are doing and have done. We decided at the outset that as we were pioneering, we should begin carefully and painstakingly to demonstrate, not by our professions but by our practices, that we were dependable, we were reliable, that we looked upon ourselves as an adjunct of government, that we were reasonable, that we had no intention of setting federal employees up as a preferred class in the body politic, that any proposals that we made would be submitted to the acid test of fairness, of reasonableness, and of economic soundness, that we would only insist upon fair dealing, and in return we would not in any way countenance anything that was tainted with slackerism, with inefficiency, with anything but the performance of the best possible service to the American people. And the organization can be, and all federal employees can be justly proud of the fact that in all of those intervening years, there have been differences of opinion, but in no single instance has anyone, high or low, been able to pin on the National Federation of Federal Employees any action, any statement, anything that savored of anything except a devotion to the best interests of the American people. That is an asset that will continue to grow with time. As I say, we don't expect, never do expect everyone to agree with us, but your organization is respected. And that means that it has the entree everywhere, and we have no difficulty in getting our views across to those who have either the recommendation or the actual decision to make. Since I first entered the Federal Service, I have seen that phenomenon, the change in control of the federal government from one political party to another, occur 5 times. And the pattern is very much the same, except that the last change, a little over a year ago, had some considerable differences. With the growth and complexity of public service, the statement attributed to President Jackson, although I've always felt that he had more sense than to make such a statement, that there was no position in the federal government that any honest man could not occupy. If that was true in 1828, it certainly is not true in 1954. While honesty is certainly an important quality, not always observed in public life, however, it is not sufficient to qualify a person for all of the complex duties that are required in our present-day civilization. And so, what originally started by the old civil service reformers as a negative thing, a civil service system which was designed to keep out the spoilsman, has had to slowly work around to the positive factor of not only selection on the basis of competitive test, but then the development through promotion, transfer, in-service training, and all of those things, to develop a service that can meet the demands of the American people. When I say to you that we entered into a vacuum, I mean just that. We had been in existence as an organization for 13 years before any president of the United States ever submitted anything to Congress in the way of a message or a recommendation having to do with changing or improving the conditions of the civilian personnel. The first time that was done was a memorandum submitted by President Herbert Hoover in 1930 on giving his ideas as to improvement of the federal retirement system. Prior to that time, everything that was offered came out of the workshop of the National Federation of Federal Employees. Because in those days, there being no relation between titles, salaries, and duties performed, we saw that before any lasting improvement in the economic conditions of federal employees could be undertaken, to be secured, we must have a starting point. We must not only take an inventory, but be able to identify all the various occupational categories on the basis of duties and responsibilities required in that particular position or type of position. And so we designed and set up, yes, and if you please, paid for the necessary research out of our limited organization funds to bring about the passage of the original Compensation Classification Act, which received considerable comment all over the world as a unique contribution to governmental operation by the employees themselves, when those at the top, both legislative and executive, seem to be in a deep and continuing Rip Van Winkle sleep. Well, that time has considerably changed. The climate is different. But nevertheless, the National Federation of Federal Employees has not as yet gotten out of breath keeping ahead of the official procession in suggested improvements in the operation of government. And I do not anticipate that we will be outrun in the immediate future. With the change in control of government, there were certain unmistakable mandates of the electorate, such as a reduction in the number of civilian employees, an insistence on bringing income and outgo closer together, the balancing of the budget, and then that thing that was talked up and down, which was never clearly defined, and each one who uttered or passed along the expression had his own definition of what it meant, cleaning up the mess. And then some for political reasons, some who were sincere enough but not very well informed about the complexities of government, and the campaign of general derogation ran along for, well, probably from 1950 on, and gathered in intensity during the campaign of 52. Edmund Burke said nearly 200 years ago that you can't indict a nation. And yet those in public life, politicians, editors of publications all over the country, columnists, newscasters did endeavor to indict the men and women working for Uncle Sam. Cartoonists had a field day. Never yet has the National Federation of Federal Employees ever taken up the case of an individual or a group of individual employees until it was first satisfied as to the merits of that case. As an organization, we've always looked upon those who deviated from the proper road as those who would drag down, if not destroy, not only the reputation but the well-being of the vast majority of those who are honestly and faithfully performing their duties. But in these sweeping characterizations, these smears, such as the cartoon in that great newspaper, mechanically and circulationally speaking, the Chicago Daily News, where federal employees were characterized as a big fat hog feeding at the public trough. Tax eaters, drones, parasites on the body politic. Every unpleasant adjective you could think of was applied not to individuals, not to those who were caught with their hand in the till or doing anything else that was out of character or a violation of their oaths of office, but the whole mass. And so in our humble way we started the Truth Campaign. Everything that came to our attention on the air, on television, speech, editorial, or whatnot, that was clear off as to facts or that represented a wholesale and undeserved smear, we answered, giving and citing our authority for our reply to set them right. We asked locals throughout the United States, when any of that material came into their hands, do what they could locally with the editor if it was in a local publication, send it on to us, and we'd take a hand in it. Well, I wouldn't say that we had it stopped, but we've slowed it down somewhat. In fact, we've gained a few converts. We've even got the redoubtable Westbrook Pegler so that he talks about other things and leaves federal employees alone for a while. We being the only outfit that seemed to have the nerve to tackle Mr. Pegler. As I say, we haven't got the campaign of defamation entirely stopped, but we're at least making as much progress as the young fellow from Chicago who became quite an alcoholic. His habits were very bad, and it was great worry to his family and friends. And so a couple of his best friends decided to give him a definite object lesson about his drinking habits. And they took him down to Peoria, drove down there, and they got there one night about 8 o'clock. And they drove him around the great distilleries, all lit up, all going full blast. They said to him, "Now look here, John, be practical, be realistic. Do you think for 1 minute that you can drink that stuff as fast as they make it?" John says, "No, I don't, but I got them working nights anyhow." At any rate, we have made that much progress. Now, the President of the United States, both before and since induction into office, has in a number of instances expressed himself as believing not only in the honesty and integrity of civilian federal employees, but in their capabilities. And that was his purpose, to maintain and strengthen the civil service. Unfortunately, some of those in the first and second and third and fourth echelons either haven't read or heard what he said, or didn't think he meant it seriously, because there is a certain crop of mischievous actions, not as on such a large, such a wholesale scale as would have occurred under similar circumstances a generation or two ago, but still unfair, vexatious, and tainted with some form of political spoilsmanship, either of the partisan character or, what is even more insidious, the personal political favoritism. We did not expect, and so advised the membership repeatedly, that during the first few months of the new administration, while the new appointees at top level were adjusting themselves to a new and more or less strange land, while they were setting a pattern for expenditures, that it could not be expected that legislation which would involve expenditure of additional sums of money from the Treasury would get very far, if at all. And so the last session of Congress wound up just about that way. But with the advent of the session which began last January, there were a long list of things that might be considered under the head of unfinished business that were needed to be done. Things that required legislation. Things that represented either discriminations against large segments of the federal employee personnel, or in which federal employment lagged behind the more enlightened and progressive and successful private employers. We also, under mandate of the convention of the National Federation of Federal Employees, were instructed to work for an overhaul of the compensation classification system, affecting the some at present time 980,000 of the Classification Act group, exclusive of the Wage Board employees and of the Field Postal Service. Now, a great deal is being said at the present time. The budget must be balanced. You cannot expect to raise the salaries of federal employees, which would have a tendency, an inflationary tendency, which would disturb the national economy. We approach it from this angle, which we are prepared to defend and to justify. the people of this country are entitled to good service at the hands of their public officials and public employees on the federal level. Of course, they are on all levels, but I'm confining myself to the federal group. These are facts. The last time the breakdown was had, in 1950, there were only 25% of the civilian employees in the so-called Class Act group with more than 10 years service. As the Whitten rider, placing such a severe limitation upon permanent appointments since 1950, has reduced that proportion to around 20%. In other words, only 20% of that group, of approximately 1 million employees, have 10 or more years service. During the last calendar year, when under instructions of the President of the United States, every administrator was instructed to give first priority to reducing the number of employees, as a result of which there were some 130,000 less employees at the end of the year than there were on January 20th, Inauguration Day. Notwithstanding which, some 511,000 employees left the service for one reason or another and had to be replaced by 373,000 new appointments. Think of that turnover in relation to the size of the group. No private business on the face of the earth could stand such a ruinous rate of turnover. The constant passing out of experienced and qualified employees and their replacement by green and inexperienced employees with the constant tremendous expense of training them into some semblance of knowledge of the duties and responsibilities expected of them. That is simply wasting money, pouring it down the rat hole in Niagara-like proportions. It is idle to talk about federal employees' pay at the present time being adequate, that there's no trouble at all to recruit in most categories all the employees you need, in the face of testimony recently given by the chairman of the Civil Service Commission, to the effect that in large number of instances, finding it difficult to the point of impossibility to recruit men and women under existing standards, they've lowered the standards. Between cutting off opportunities for advancement, between the constant bombardment of unthinking and some vicious critics, the best blood in the service is constantly being drained, going out into private business and industry. Those who are recruited at the lower levels become disillusioned in large numbers see no future and go out, and then this constant turnover, constant turnover. There are two alternatives. One is to gyp the people of the United States, to say, oh yes, you can have the service of the federal government, but it'll be mediocre because we are employing third and fourth and fifth stringers. Of course, the future under that short-sighted plan can easily be foreseen. The other is to recognize that the people of the United States are entitled to good service at the hands of their public servants, and to look the thing squarely in the face, to maintain high standards, and to fix rates of compensation that will not only attract but retain people at those standards. The ultimate goal there is, of course, in the long run, fewer employees, but of the best. So many instances could be given where one competent, all-round, experienced, and well-paid employee can do the work of a dozen of the other type. So we are, I haven't been on the stand yet, but I expect to be, maybe Monday, maybe after the Easter holidays, to present to the committees of Congress in the interest, in the cold-blooded interest of service to the American people. Look at this issue not as the federal service a refuge for countless numbers of people who can't get jobs anywhere else, but to offer an inducement, to offer plans to improve the service in many respects so as to secure and retain the best, because the American people are entitled to the best. We have and are making some progress on a bill which is the Carlson bill in the Senate, named after the chairman of the Senate Committee on Post Office and Civil Service, unanimously reported to the Senate favorably. It's been introduced in the House, but hearings on pay matters have held back hearings on that. And this Carlson bill contains a number of things for which the National Federation of Federal Employees has worked for some time past. We discussed them at length with Senator Carlson. He embodied them in his bill, such as true overtime for work performed in excess of the scheduled work week, to bring up from the present level of $2,980 up to the top of grade 9, wherever that falls. Present time, that's $5,810 leave. To repeal written rider, to remove that ball and chain from operating officials, so that permanent appointments may be made and that transfers and promotions will not have to be on the temporary and indefinite basis, and the other restrictions that so hamper competent administration. Straightening out and systematizing night differential, the work week, incentive pay, providing that where uniforms are required of employees in connection with their official duties, the expense up to $100 a year be borne by the employer. putting federal employees on an equality with those in private employ in respect of unemployment insurance. I'm quite hopeful of the enactment of that legislation during the current session. Retirement is in the doldrums pending a report from a committee consisting of several top officials, government, among others, Director of the Budget, Chairman of the Civil Service Commission, and with the staff under the executive direction of Mr. Elliott Kaplan. They haven't made their report yet, but from what has leaked out and oozed out, the recommendations resemble too much the long-range opinions of those who do not understand the federal service, federal employees, or their views on the subject of retirement. Because it is anticipated that they will propose a liaison, a merger, an integration, one of those $2 words, but they all somewhat resemble the famous occasion when the lion and the lamb lay down together, and when they got up, why, the lamb was there, but he was inside. We have no quarrel with Social Security or the old age survivors feature of Social Security, but it has a different base. Unlike the Federal Civil Service retirement system, which is a part of and the concluding chapter in the working life of the federal employee, a member of that system, OASI injects the element of need. Regardless of what anybody says, it has been somewhat of a political football. It is still in the experimental stage. Hearings are at the present time going on before the House Ways and Means Committee, considering some major changes, and in the forecast for the future, they're talking about increasing the deductions to a possible maximum of 11%, or a median figure of 9%, and a minimum of 7.5%. So that were the 2 or more million federal employees who are now members of the federal retirement system to become merged, integrated, or whatever you choose to call it, and a portion of the present 6% deduction diverted to OASI, it is possible, without straining one's imagination, to see where the 75 million would ultimately absorb the 2 million. And may I say that up to the present time, from our membership, I have heard nothing but, in accordance with the unanimous action of successive conventions, an insistence that the federal retirement system, for which ample deductions are being made, be maintained as a separate entity without any entangling alliances with any other system whatsoever. So I will take that risk and venture into a prediction: there will be no retirement legislation at the present session of Congress. Why didn't somebody grab my coattails? I'm in worse fix than the chap who asked the speaker, he says, shall we let the audience amuse themselves a little while, have a good time a little while longer, or shall I put you on to speak? I'm not going to detain you any longer, except to say I'm glad to be here to meet, talk briefly with the group of Oklahomans that have been here today and are here tonight, to tell them that if they really believe in what they're doing, if they really and truly are proud of the work that they're doing for the federal government and of that federal government, then I enjoin you to do something for yourselves in this great cooperative enterprise. If you are merely transients that are on the payroll of the federal government just as a stopgap between jobs while looking out the window and don't care about the past or the future, you would be no addition to the National Federation of Federal Employees and are certainly no addition to the federal government rolls. But to those men and women who see in public service not only a challenge but an opportunity to perform good service with a lot of inner satisfaction, then enlist for the war, because it'll be a long one, in which there are no shortcuts, in which there have been and will continue to be substantial gains. But you get out of it just what you put into it. There's no such thing as pushing a button and moving on both to economic ease and economic security. You'll have to work for what you get, but there it is. If you want it, you get it.